This review is brought to you in part by Ryder's Hobby Shops, where the fun begins. Stop in to one of Ryder's 2 convenient Michigan locations where you'll find a full range of the latest hobby products, supplies, parts, tools, and paint. You'll find aisles and aisles of scale model kits, RC models, model rockets, Warhammer gaming, and railroading products. Stop in at Ryder's today and tell them Doug sent you. This review covers the GMC Astro 1/25th scale. It has about 250 pieces with an intermediate skill level, and the pieces are molded in white, chrome, clear red with black vinyl tires and water slide decals. The instructions are pretty nicely laid out, and when you're done with the kit, the dimensions will be about 9 1/4 by length by 4 1/4 width and 5 1/2 inches high. Now, this kit has been released in a number of versions. Here's some of the versions that I picked up off of various locations and sources, but it's been re-released again, and that just shows you how good this kit is and how what good standing it has with modelers, because they keep releasing it and people keep buying it. It's a nice clean look, especially with the two-tone paint here and all the bling that surrounds it, and everybody seems to enjoy putting this kit together. It's altogether not that difficult a build, and it's just got a lot of pieces, so we'll show you what to look for and how to do it. Here's the layout of the kit, and as you can see, there's quite a few pieces. And it comes with a nice set of decals, but I thought that mine would pop a little bit better if I showed off the features of this kit with a two-tone paint. So I did not use the decals, although the register looks good on them, and I'm sure they're of good quality. So they're obviously very usable. Now, we'll be using liquid cement for the most part, sometimes super glue for strength, and white or crystal clear glue for window pieces. But always remember to heed the manufacturer's safety and use guidelines when using any of the products that you see or hear used in the review. Instruction starts with the engine block, so we're going to take those pieces you see, and we're going to assemble those with some liquid cement, and they go together in the normal fashion. Obviously you just attach the cylinder heads to the two block halves that were assembled, and then you paint that. I used Duplicolor's Detroit Diesel Alpine Green for this. Now we'll have you go ahead and find these pieces out of the kit. Now the chrome plated, we're going to put them in a bleach bath here in just a minute and then paint them, but for mock-up and demonstration and position, we'll show you here as they're chromed where they go. So add the oil filter attached to the right valve cover, and then that assembly in the left and the oil cooler, they get later they'll get sprayed with the Alpine Green engine paint and then attached to the engine. But the left manifold and the right manifold, they're painted semi-gloss black and then attached to the engine. Now here we show you some of the close-ups, but in this view you can see the black pieces attached to the engine and the semi-green that we painted earlier. We use these supercharger pieces, and we're going to do the same thing. Remove the chrome plating in a bleach bath, and then once that's cleaned and dried, we're going to paint those with the Detroit Diesel Green, and then we're going to attach the lower and the upper sections together, and then the rear section and front to the supercharger assembly, and then the governor gets installed on the front of the supercharger assembly, and then that whole thing is attached to the engine on top there. We'll work with these pieces next and continue mostly in the front of the engine. Now the water connections, the fan mount, and the water pump are stripped and painted green, and the fuel filter, air conditioner pump, and the fan are painted semi-gloss black. Then the fan pulley gets painted flat black, the belts, and then semi-gloss black for the pulleys. The water connections, the fan mount, and the water pump then are attached to the engine assembly, and the fuel filter gets attached to the water connections. Now the air conditioner pump and fan are installed to the fan pulley, and then that is placed on the engine assembly in front. We'll stage these pieces next, and again we're going to remove the chrome from the chrome pieces, and the supercharger drive case halves are then assembled, and the air compressor halves are put together. Now the pulley cover gets attached to the alternator, and that assembly is attached to the supercharger drive case assembly. Now the air compressor assembly and oil filler tube are attached to the supercharger drive case assembly, and the supercharger drive case assembly then is also sprayed with the alpine green, and the supercharger case assembly is installed onto the engine. The transmission oil filter shown here gets attached to the rear of the transmission plate, and then that assembly is sprayed with the Detroit Diesel Alpine Green. Then the transmission rear assembly gets attached to the engine. When the engine assembly dries, we're going to turn our attention to the wheels and wheel assemblies. And both front wheels get painted gloss black, and then the front wheel is installed onto one side of the tire, while the front flange is installed into the other side of the tire to trap it, and then attached to the front wheel. Then you repeat the step for the other front tire. Now on the rear sets of tires here, the dualies wheel. Clean up the flash. You see there's some flash in one of the rims, their inner halves, and we're going to paint the spiders and the hubcaps gloss black, and then assemble the tires with the inner and outer trim ring flanges there, and the second wheel installed onto the back side of the first. But they go together pretty common sense wise, and they can be put together in just a short fashion here after the paint dries on the inner portions. I'll go ahead and find these parts in the kit, and this is part of the ladder frame, of course, and we'll be using the front cross member and the transmission supports and attach those to the right side of the frame. And the two mid cross member halves are then assembled and installed onto the frame's right side. The track rod cross member halves are also installed onto the right side. Now the rear cross member is attached to the right side, and the left side of the frame is attached to the front cross member, transmission support, the mid cross member assemblies, all those units that have already been attached to the right side. Now one of the anti-lock wheel and brake control valves, number 66, gets attached to the interior side of the right frame between the transmission support and the mid cross member assembly. The second one is attached, that's part number 67, attached to the interior side of the left frame, and it gets in the same place between the track rod cross member and the rear cross member. Now the engine support's attached to both frame sides by the transmission support. Trademark stamp there for on the side of the frame rails can just be scraped off with a blade and then sanded smooth if you want a nice clean look. The front spring assemblies here, sub-assemblies, can be attached to the frame left and right sides, and I've used super glue for most of the suspension pieces on a frame just for strength, and once that's done you can paint the entire unit gloss black. Pieces from the kit: the steering unit, the idler arm, pitman arm, front axle tie rod, left shock and right shock, and they get painted gloss black too. Now remember to scrape off any paint or chrome plating when you want to join pieces together for a good bond. So once the paint is dry, we're going to attach the front axle to the frame assembly, and then the tie rod gets attached to the front axle. Now the left shock is applied to the left front spring on the frame's left side, and the right shock is attached to the right front spring on the right side. The steering unit then can be attached to the left front spring, and the idler arm gets installed on the steering unit. Now the pitman arm is attached to the idler arm and the front axle. These parts will get painted gloss black except for the stub axles, and that means stripping the chrome off the smaller parts there, the brake cylinder and the air brake bracket. And then the front air brake cylinder is attached to the bracket, and then the air brake assembly gets attached to the front backing plate. Then the plastic stub axle is installed into the front backing plate there, and you repeat that for the assembly on the other side. Now, finally, the front tire assemblies can be installed onto the front backing plate assemblies on each side. Gather up the rear springs, the leaf springs, and the rocker beam pivots, and they get painted gloss black. And then we're going to attach the right spring to the right side and the left to the left, and the rocker beam pivot then is attached between the two springs. Pick up these parts for the rear axle halves and differentials and paint those gloss black. And then we are going to take the front differential assembly and attach that to the rear axle assembly. And then the assembly is painted again gloss black and attached to the rear spring assembly. Now the rear axle halves are assembled and painted gloss black and attached to the rear spring assembly. And the front track rod, the rear track rod, and the inner axle shaft can be painted black as well. Now those are then attached to the rear axle assembly and the track rod cross member, and the rear track rod is attached to the axle assembly and the cross member. Now the inner axle shaft is installed between the front rear axle assembly and the rear. Get these pieces out of the kit, but keep the parts separate and identified, because they need to be correctly installed in the right place. So both backing plates number 111 and 227 and the 4 air brakes and the brackets there are painted gloss black. And for the front rear axle assembly, the air brake gets attached to the air brake bracket number 207. Then that is attached to the backing plate number 227. Now you repeat that for the second backing plate, that's the number 227 one assembly. However, make sure that the air brake's installed correctly. Now these assemblies are installed into the front rear axle assembly with both air brake assemblies facing the front of the frame. Okay, the front of the frame assembly. Now for the rear, it's basically the same part numbers, air bracket 208, and then the bracket then is attached to backing plates 111. So repeat that for the other side, and then the assemblies are installed onto the rear axle assemblies, both air brake assemblies facing the rear of the frame assembly there. Now we'll use the metal axles, and one gets tapped gently into one of the rear tire assemblies and then slid through the holes there for the axles, and then you just squeeze the other tire assembly on the other side and do the same for the other unit, either the front or back, whichever one you start with first. Locate the front drive shaft and paint that gloss black. When it's dry, the engine assembly gets installed into the frame, and simultaneously we're going to place the front drive shaft and install that between the front axle and the engine. Opted for the single exhaust version, and for the that you'll take the stack support bracket, the exhaust pipe, and the exhaust crossover and paint them gloss black. Then the air filter stack halves are assembled and painted silver. Now the muffler and the exhaust stack can be assembled before they get painted silver. The stack support bracket then is attached to the right side of the frame, and the air filter stack assembly is attached to the support bracket, and then the air filter cap is attached on top of the stack assembly. Now the muffler exhaust stack assembly can be attached to the air filter stack assembly, and then the exhaust crossover can be attached to the engine support, the left exhaust manifold, and the right exhaust manifold. Now the single exhaust pipe can be installed between the exhaust stack and the crossover. Again, for the single exhaust version, the air filter bracket here will be painted gloss black before it's attached to the right side of the frame, and then the air filter halves are assembled and attached to the air filter bracket. The air intake can be attached to the filter assembly and also the air filter stack assembly. Now the air outlet tube halves are assembled and then installed into the supercharger and the air filter assembly. Here's the round fuel tank version for my build. So we're going to take the fuel tank halves left and right, assemble those, and then install them into the brackets, and then add the end caps onto those. Now the left fuel tank assembly then can be painted silver or chromed, and it gets installed into the the rear fuel tank bracket, the center fuel tank bracket, and the front fuel tank bracket. Now, the large air tank then is attached to the left side of the center fuel tank bracket, and the chrome air tank attached to the frame's left side. Now, we assemble the right half fuel tank into the bracket, and then the left battery box bracket and the right one are attached to the battery box's bottom half, and the batteries are installed into the bottom, and top half then is attached. Then the battery box assembly is attached to the frame assembly. Get these pieces out, and the including the bumper and the radiator pieces, and then the radiator stone guard, the bumper gets attached to the front assembly of the frame first, and then the radiator stone guard attached to the bottom of the bumper, and then the radiator halves, which are listed as the supercharger drive case halves, then are assembled and painted gloss black before the assembly is attached to the frame. Now the radiator hoses are painted flat black and attached to both sides of the radiator and the water connections on the engine. The shift tower is painted gloss black and then attached to the left side of the frame by the shock there, and the shift gate can be attached to the shift tower, and then the shift lever finally installed onto the shift gate. Shift to the back of the tractor here, and the tail light bracket, the license plate, the left and right mud flaps, and both of the cab support brackets, and both bracket supports are then painted gloss black. Now the tail light lens is installed into the tail light bezel, and use some clear part cement there or white glue, and repeat that for the other tail light. Now the tail light bracket can be attached to the frame, and both tail light assemblies and the license plates are attached to the tail light bracket. The left and right mud flaps are detailed with some flat black before they're installed onto the frame. Cab support bracket then is attached to the bracket support, and this is done twice, and then the bracket support assemblies are attached to the frame. A close-up that will show both bracket support assemblies so that they can be seen attached to the frame and their positions. There's an instruction here that affects this section. So they say to use air tank number 64, but we've already used that in a previous assembly here. But there's an extra tank part number 214 that can be used in that place. So the air tank slide plate, fifth wheel carrier, and fifth wheel then are painted gloss black, and the air tank's attached to the right side of the frame, and the slide plate is attached to the frame assembly. Now the fifth wheel carrier is attached to the slide plate, and the fifth wheel then attached to the carrier. No glue's needed there if you want that to be functional. If you're looking for a contest nice smooth parts, you're not going to find them in this kit because there are ejector pins. It's an older mold, and here on the slide plate you'll find some that you'll want to maybe remove if you have need for a really nice looking model. Here is the interior pieces that we'll work on next, and I painted the bottom of the interior tub flat black, and then the inside I used a light gray, and the front wall is painted light gray as well, and the bed gets painted flat white, and with some Model Masters sea gray are the colors I used there, and the front wall and the bed then are installed into the interior. Grab these parts and strip the chrome, and then one dry we'll be painting those flat black and installing them into the interior assembly. These are up the parts for the seats, and I used the high back version here, and the passenger seat base is painted light gray and then installed, and the driver's seat support halves are assembled and painted semi-gloss black and then are installed into the bucket there, and the right side high back is attached to the seat back, and the assembly then painted engine gray. Now the right seat assembly is attached to the passenger seat base, and the left high back seat then is halves are put together and then painted gray as well. And when that's dry, the left seat assembly is attached to the driver's seat support. Next we'll work on the instrument panel, and I painted that light gray, and then detailed it with some gloss brown for the wood tones, some silver, flat black, and some red and yellow for some of the features there. The steering column cover gets painted light gray, and the filler panel is painted light gray as well. And then on the outside, flat black. Now the steering wheel is painted a light gray and detailed with silver and semi-gloss black, and the CB radio gets painted semi-gloss black as well. Now the steering column cover can be attached to the interior, and the filler panel attached to the interior assembly by the passenger seat there. The CB and the steering wheel then are attached to the instrument panel, and the instrument panel assembly is installed into locating notches in the interior bucket. Well, let's work on the cab, and we want to remove any blemishes or sand off any flash that you find there. And then you have to decide what kind of lights, horns, and the rooftop that you want to use so that you can open up the appropriate holes for those to be added. Now, I sprayed the cab with some gloss white, then masked it off and sprayed the bottom half gloss red. Then all the glass is installed using some white cement or clear cement. Install cab pieces here, the open curtain, the right open curtain, then there's sleeper walls on the right and left, and they're painted light gray and installed into the interior assembly. And there's also a closed curtain wall option to close off the lower section, but I didn't use that for my build. The exterior of the sleeper assembly then is painted flat black. Do some dry fitting to find out where the contact points are, then apply some glue and scrape off any paint and install the interior assembly into the cab. Grab the grill from the kit, scrape off the chrome plating where it'll be glued into position at the contacts, and glue that into position in the cab assembly. These pieces for the front end, and the headlights then are attached to the bezels with some clear part cement or white glue, and then the bezels are glued into the cab assembly. And the air duct and the clutch cover are painted flat black and then installed into the bottom of the interior. Pieces are next. The cab handles, the windshield wipers, and they're attached to the cab assembly. And the GM script there is detailed with some gloss red and then attached to the cab assembly. And there's also an optional sun visor, but I didn't use that in my build. Up the horn pieces and lights here, and we're going to use the two air horn halves and assemble them onto the roof of the cab assembly. And the standard lights, number 211, were used for this build. So they're detailed with some turn signal amber in the front and attached to the roof. And there's a painted paired horn there, and it had a different style of fleet running lights that can be used for that. Now we can add the handrails and mirrors, etc. So the left and right handrails and the step plate on both sides are painted silver, and then the turn signals they get detailed with some turn signal amber. And the left handrail, the left step plate, and right step plate, and the turn signals, and the left side GMC symbol and the left mirror get attached to the left side, and then an antenna gets attached to the left mirror. Then you do the same thing on the right side for those pieces. Look for the grab handle here and install that on the cab on the left side. Use a little super glue to put that into place. Find the left and right cab pivots here and paint those gloss black, and when they're dry, attach those to the cab assembly. And while it's still soft, install the cab assembly onto the frame, and then you can use I used a paint can lid here to support the cab in the open position until the glue on the cab pivots is dry. Once the pivots had dried, it was apparent that the shift tower needed to be straightened up a little bit. So I used a small pair of pliers, removed that, and then angled it almost straight up vertically so that it would have a better fit for the cab to sit on the frame. So once I'd gotten that into the right position, I used some super glue to put that back into place at the correct angle. As you can see here, there are quite a few optional pieces left over from this kit. The options were square tanks instead of round fuel tanks, an airfoil for the top of the cab, dual exhaust instead of single, even seats. Oh, there you have it. This great looking kit is a blast from the past, and the GM Astro 95 was a venerable workhorse on the roadways. A lot of fleets used them, and they were pretty strong contenders to get goods and things from place to place. You'll still see them occasionally on the highways or at construction sites, but as a model, it's a real nice looking kit, and it looks like it means business. It goes together pretty well. Even though the molds are pretty old, you'll need to do a little cleanup there, but everything actually assembles very, very well, pretty easily. So if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf. We hope you like this premium step-by-step model kit review from Right On Replicas. And so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on our icon in the lower right-hand corner of any of our reviews. Or you could see us on our Facebook page or website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks.